All right. Hello and welcome to PopFlash, a weekly roundup and discussion of Counter-Strike news. I'm Jack Westerman, joined by Jason Moses O'Toole, and this is what happened in Counter-Strike this week. Our top story this week, as it has been for the past few weeks, is ESL and ESEA's Pro League. This week, it's essentially the mid-season review. We just finished week 5 at the weekend. We're now in week 6, and so far there have been a couple of standout players, both in North America and over in Europe. So, first of all, Moses, on the North American side, we've got Taric, Semphis, and Fur, who are all three guys playing extremely well. Taric is on a frag per round of 0.921. Semphis has got average damage a round of 95. All having standout performances. Have any of those three players particularly impressed you?
Taric and Semphis mostly would be the two that stick out, just because Taric is such a crucial player on CLG. That's someone they need to perform this well if they want to continue winning, and we've seen when he's not performing well how much they struggle. So him being at that level, I mean, they're still middle of the pack right now, so which is kind of interesting. But he's had a great season so far, and he needs to continue that, as well as JDM. Semphis, on the other hand, he's kind of reinvented himself as an opper. He's doing a wonderful job for Nihilum, picking up that AWP. He's had a couple fantastic rounds with it, but also we saw how much he struggled at the end of Cloud9 with kind of the role confusion they had going on, and it seems like he's really found a new purpose in Nihilum, and he stepped his performance up massively. He looks like a completely different player from the end of his time in Cloud9.
Okay, and jumping over to the European side, there are a couple of players we should talk about as having standout performances over here. So, first of all, Crims from Fnatic, he's sitting at 0.89 frags per round at the moment. Device, he's got 325 total frags, which makes him number 1 in Europe. Are these the guys you'd necessarily expect to be top fragging at the midpoint of the season?
I don't know if expect is the right word, but it's definitely not surprising. They're both incredibly talented players. Device, coming off a great tournament as well, but in this run that TSM's had, he's been a fantastic player for him. Crims has always been a world-class player, and especially on Fnatic, it's him and Olaf has a great start to the season, but we've also seen stretches where Flusha and even JW, any of those guys can lead threat fragging for Fnatic through stretches. So not surprising, or not expected, but not surprising.
Well, let's talk more broadly now in that case and look at the teams in Europe and North America at the midpoint of the season. So if we start in North America once again, we've got, the top 3 teams, first of all, are Cloud9, Keystars, and Nihilum. Right. You've got Luminosity and Liquid, who aren't too far behind. North America is essentially very open at this point, right?
Right.
Which teams do you see having the strongest second half of the season?
Cloud9, they're 13-2. They're sitting very, very high. They're 3 wins again, above the next seed in the division, and playing really well. And they benefit off having the best opper in Skadoodle, the best in-game leader in Sean. So I'd expect them to just continue this pace. They've been beating teams, move-up teams. They've been doing well against. They have losses to, I think it's Tempo, Storm, and Elevate, but they play really, really well. Liquid's also had a resurgence off the back of Nitro. Is kind of, really stepped his game up since Gfinity. That's helping them out a lot. So they're playing really, really good Counter-Strike. And those are the 2 teams at the moment playing the best Counter-Strike. Not that Liquid will finish necessarily in the top, because like you said, it's highly contested. But they're playing some of the best Counter-Strike in North America. Luminosity is also doing very, very well on a 5-game winning streak at the moment.
Also worth talking about in North America actually is pickups, because prior to the season beginning we saw a huge amount of change. Skadoodle and Freakazoid on Cloud9, there was Semphis and Hiko joining Nihilum, Naf, Pith and Peter all joining Luminosity.
Right.
In hindsight, at the midpoint of the season, which team got the best pickup prior to the season starting?
Anytime you can pick up the best opper in the region in Skadoodle, that's just gonna skyrocket you. Like, there's no question that there's even an opper in North America close to what he's capable of doing, the level he's capable of playing at. In my opinion, it's going to be Cloud9 just off the back of that. You look at a team like Affinity, though, who picked up Abe and Arya. 2 players who have a lot of experience in a lot of different invite teams. Without that pickup of those 2 players, they probably have 3 to 4 less wins this season at this point. That's a hugely impactful pickup. As well as, Semphis and Hiko are both playing pretty well for Nihilum, but they still haven't put it all together. They're still not this team that is kind of dominating the scene right now. So Cloud9 really got the good end of the deal, especially because with Cloud9 specifically, that solves a lot of the role issues we saw them have towards the end of last year, towards the beginning of this year. All that confusion with Semphis and Shroud. It's much neater and much more defined roles in that team.
And just finally, before we finish on this topic and move on, we should talk very briefly about the European teams. So currently, top three are Team Solo Mid, Fnatic, and NIP. But again, it's still very open in Europe at this stage, right?
Right. Yeah, and part of it too is Fnatic and TSM are going to be the two that you want to watch. That's turning into a really, really cool rivalry, really great rivalry. TSM has been edging them out in tournaments recently, just beating up on them just this past weekend. But on the season series, they're 1-1. They split their maps. Fnatic won Overpass, TSM won Mirage. The big thing is NIP started out really slow, and they had this late run going on right now that's helping them climb the ranks. But the big thing is too, there's a lot of teams in Europe that are, Virtus Pro only has played 10 matches. Fnatic, TSM, and NIP are all up towards like 14 to 16 matches played. So, there's still a lot of room for these teams to climb just based off the number of matches they've played.
Our second story this week is Fragbite Masters number 4, held in Stockholm, Sweden over the weekend. Now, Team Solo Mid did win the whole thing. They beat Fnatic in the grand final 3-1. Fnatic came second place, Na'Vi finished third, and Hellraisers finished fourth. There's only 4 teams in attendance, right?
Right.
So, first question for you, Moses. It was Team Solo Mid versus Fnatic in the grand final. That's probably not surprising given the teams in attendance. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, very fair to say. I think everyone pretty much expected that to be the finals matchup, was those two teams. I think what was also a little bit surprising was, we've seen Na'Vi improving, over the past couple months and playing pretty well at times. And they played a really close semifinal series with TSM, both maps going into overtime. So that was really cool to see. But I think it was just a little bit surprising that Na'Vi put up that much of a fight to TSM, in my opinion.
Okay, so talking more specifically about that relationship between TSM and Fnatic, it kind of seems like TSM has had Fnatic's number for the early part of this year. What is it about TSM that makes them so effective against Fnatic in particular?
I think part of it is when you look at Fnatic as a team, their success is, they have, I mentioned earlier, 4 players, Flusha, JW, Olaf and Krims, who at any point with their individual skill can take over matches and take over stretches of that team's performance and just dominate and be this player that leads them to. And Pronax can even do it sometimes with his tactics, with his mid-round calls that can sometimes just be perfect. So they really have 5 players that are so good at impacting the game, and they have a lot of success because of the individual plays that can be made by these players. It's so hard to like predict when it's going to happen, because at any point with their game sense, they can just break out and make this massive play happen. And I think TSM counters that really well because they have players that can do something similar. Device had a fantastic tournament and even better finals in their route of Fnatic. Cajun B as well ended with like a plus 16, just right behind Device. He was a monster as well. Zipex had some immensely impactful rounds. So TSM also has these individual players that can have huge impacts on the game, much in the same way that Fnatic players can. And I think it's a little bit of Fnatic needing almost fighting themselves through certain stretches. And obviously too, some of their players that you don't expect to kind of dip down in performance in the finals didn't have the greatest performance, but part of that is just because of how well the TSM players have played against them.
Given the fact that TSM seem to be so successful against Fnatic and have beaten them so many times this year, does that almost give them grounds? Do we consider them, almost the best team in the world because they can beat Fnatic, who are by acclamation the current title holder, I guess? Yeah,
they've certainly thrust themselves into that conversation, and very deservedly so. For me personally, I wouldn't put them over Fnatic quite yet. We saw how much they struggled against Na'Vi. They had a really tough series against them. They still kind of struggle against some other teams at the top in Europe. But definitely Fnatic, they're just able to consistently beat Fnatic, and that's a team that's going to keep TSM. We've seen how much they've improved recently from consistent second places to now always at the top and always in the finals and everything like that. So that's going to be an interesting thing to keep track of. But I don't think they've overtaken Fnatic, at least in my opinion, quite yet.
All right, last but not least this week, Moses, I've got a few quick-fire topics for you. So, give me your thoughts on the following news stories. First of all, Kingwin have announced that they're going to be attending DreamHack Summer, the BYOC tournament, and it will be their first LAN appearance.
Yeah, really excited for that. See how far they've come. They played really well in the Alienware Cup #2 just a couple weeks ago. They beat Virtus Pro in a best of 3. They got second to TSM, but they've also struggled to get some lower tier teams over in Europe at times. So this will be a good snapshot of where they're at as a squad.
Na'Vi have replaced TSM at ESWC.
That's a bummer, because we just talked about TSM and how well they've been playing. You obviously want the best teams to be at the event. Fnatic's going to be there, so that could have been a cool thing. But as far as I've heard, it's going to be family issues and some school things as well. So, it happens.
In the North American team, Elevate, Desi has been replaced and Professor Chaos is in.
That's going to be interesting for Desi, because he's been bounced around to a lot of teams. He's America's ringer and he's been all over the place and no one wants to keep him. So that's kind of a scary thing, whether it's attitude or his playstyle. It's probably a mixture of both. But Professor Chaos coming in, he's a guy who's willing to do whatever it takes, be put into any role that's needed of him. So that's a good addition for Elevate.
And final quickfire topic for you. At the $10,000 HTC online tournament held this past week, Cloud9 won the whole thing 2-0 over Liquid.
Yeah, a good showing out of them and Liquid, actually. I mean, Cloud9 they struggled early on against Tempo Storm, even dropping a map, so it looked a little bit scary for them for some time, but they picked it up. They looked good, and a strong win for them, 2-0 over Liquid. But the big story for me is just the play of Liquid. Nitro's back. He's playing really, really well. The addition of Flowsick really helping that squad out, and all their fraggers have kind of come alive.
That's it for this week. I'm Jack Westerman, joined by Jason Moses O'Toole.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of PopFlash.